Good evening, friends. Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where the past unfolds slowly, gently, and without any rush at all. Tonight, we're going to drift into something wonderfully mundane yet strangely fascinating. The question of how medieval kings managed to sleep through those long, brutal winters in their enormous stone castles, without a single radiator, electric blanket, or thermostat in sight. Before we begin, I invite you to dim your lights, settle deeply under your blanket, and let your body sink into whatever soft surface is holding you right now. Feel the weight of your head on your pillow. Notice how your breathing naturally begins to slow. Tonight, there's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let the centuries wash over you like a gentle tide. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, if you find yourself drifting peacefully as we wander through drafty halls and flickering firelight, feel free to tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure, just an invitation to join us again. Now then, let's step back through time to a world of stone and smoke and silence. Imagine, if you will, a winter night in the year 1380. Not last winter, with its double-glazed windows and central heating vents humming in the walls. No, this is a winter when the cold itself feels like a living thing, creeping through corridors, settling into corners, turning your breath into small clouds even indoors. Picture yourself as a king, let's say King Charles V of France, a thoughtful man who loved books and suffered from gout, lying in his chamber as snow piles against the castle walls outside. The room around you is enormous. Ceilings stretch upward into shadow, so high that the warmth from your fireplace barely reaches them. The walls are thick limestone, 3 feet deep in places, built to withstand sieges and battering rams. They're wonderful at keeping enemies out. They're also wonderful at holding the cold in, like a wine cellar holds its chill. Stone, you see, is magnificent at storing temperature. In summer, this makes your chambers blissfully cool. In winter, it makes them feel like sleeping inside a very elegant cave. Your bed, is nothing like the beds we know today. It's a massive wooden structure, almost a small room unto itself, raised high off the floor on a platform. Why so high? Well, partly for status. The higher you sleep, the more important you are, but also for a wonderfully practical reason. Cold air sinks. Heat rises. Down on the floor, where your servants might spread their pallets, the air hovers just above freezing. But up here, elevated, you catch whatever thin layer of warmth has managed to accumulate near the ceiling. It's medieval thermodynamics, worked out through centuries of uncomfortable trial and error. The bed itself is surrounded by heavy curtains, thick wool or tapestry fabric, dyed deep reds and blues, embroidered perhaps with your coat of arms or scenes from the Bible. These curtains aren't decorative, though they are beautiful. They create a smaller space within the larger room, a fabric tent that traps your body heat and the heat from the warming pans that servants have slid between your sheets. When you draw these curtains closed, you're essentially building yourself a tiny insulated room, a cocoon against the vast cold chamber beyond. Let me tell you about those sheets. You're lying between layers of linen, fine linen, probably imported from Flanders or Champagne, where they've been making the stuff since the 800s. The bottom sheet is stretched tight over a mattress stuffed with wool, feathers if you're particularly wealthy, sometimes even down from geese that were raised specifically for this purpose. On top of you, there might be 3 or 4 blankets. Wool, always wool, because wool retains warmth even when damp from your breath and the moisture in the air. And over all of this, a coverlet lined with fur. Not fake fur, mind you. Real fur, squirrel, marten, even ermine if you're showing off. Sewn in layers so thick the weight alone makes you feel secure. You might think all this would be enough, but here's where it gets interesting. Because even with all these layers, even with your bed curtains drawn tight, you're not quite warm enough. Not really. Your nose is cold. Your face, exposed to the air, feels the bite. So you've taken certain precautions. Earlier in the evening, your chamberlain, that's your bedroom manager, essentially supervised a small army of servants in preparing your chamber. They brought in braziers, which are essentially fancy metal bowls on stands filled with glowing charcoal. These were placed strategically around the room, not too close to anything flammable, giving off steady, smoky heat. The problem with braziers, of course, is that charcoal produces carbon monoxide. So the braziers were lit early, allowed to burn down to embers, and then many were removed before you entered, leaving just enough to take the worst edge off the cold without actually poisoning you. It was a delicate balance, perfected over generations of trial, error, and probably a few unfortunate incidents nobody liked to discuss. The fireplace, of course, is going. It's enormous. You could roast an entire boar in there if you wanted, and sometimes people did. Right now it holds several massive logs, oak probably, burning slowly. The fire has been carefully built by someone whose entire job is knowing how to make fires that last through the night without requiring constant attention. They've learned to choose logs of certain sizes, to arrange them in particular ways, to bank them with ash so they burn low and steady rather than hot and fast. Even so, a single fire in a room this size is like trying to heat an airplane hangar with a candle. It helps. It provides light, which is comforting, but it doesn't truly warm the space. There's something else, too, something that might seem strange to us now. You're not sleeping alone, even though you're a king. Oh, your queen might be in another chamber. Royal couples often had separate rooms, but there are other people here. A trusted servant, probably sleeping on a pallet near your door. Perhaps a young page, a nobleman's son being trained in courtly ways, curled up in the corner. In truly bitter weather, it wasn't uncommon for multiple people to share sleeping spaces, not for romantic reasons, but simply for warmth. Body heat is precious. You don't waste it. Let me share something with you about medieval food and sleep, because the two are more connected than you might think. Before bed, you might have had a small evening meal. They called it supper, from the French souper, meaning to sup or sip. In winter, this often included warm spiced wine, heated with a hot poker thrust directly into the cup, mixed with honey and perhaps some exotic spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, imported at great expense from impossibly distant lands. The warmth of this drink in your belly acts like an internal furnace, radiating heat outward. And the spices? People believed they had warming properties, that they literally heated the blood. Whether they actually did or whether it was placebo doesn't matter. The comfort was real. You might also have eaten a piece of marchpane, which is what they called marzipan back then, ground almonds mixed with sugar and rose water, formed into elaborate shapes. The recipe came north from the Arab world through Sicily and Spain, and by the 1300s, it was showing up at wealthy tables across Europe. A small piece of marchpane was thought to aid digestion and help you sleep. Plus, the sugar, still a rare luxury, provided quick energy that your body could convert to warmth through the night. Now, as you lie here in your elaborate bed, wrapped in fur and wool and linen, breathing air that's simultaneously smoky and cold, you might hear things. The wind, certainly, howling around the towers and battlements. The occasional crack of timbers settling as they contract in the cold. Perhaps the distant sound of guards changing shifts, their feet echoing on stone. These sounds are part of your night, as familiar as your own breathing. And slowly, gradually, despite the cold that nips at your nose, despite the vast darkness of the room beyond your curtains, you begin to drift. Your body, wrapped in its layers, generates its own warmth. The wine and the marchpane and the day's exertions all conspire to pull you down into sleep. And there, in your curtained cocoon high above the cold floor, you finally rest. The winter will be long. Tomorrow night will be much the same. But for now, in this moment, you've found warmth enough. And that's what mattered. Not comfort as we know it, but survival wrapped in ceremony, practicality dressed in royal robes. Let that image settle in your mind now as we drift toward our next chapter. Welcome back, dear listener. I hope you're still comfortable, still settling deeper into rest. We're going to stay in this medieval world a while longer, but now I want to peel back those bed curtains and really examine what people wore to sleep and what they did to their rooms, because the ingenuity involved is quietly remarkable. Let's talk about night clothes. You might imagine people in the Middle Ages slept naked. After all, that's often what we see in movies, or what we assume happened in less civilized times. But you'd be mostly wrong. In winter, especially, people layered up even for bed. Kings and queens, nobles and merchants, they all had nightgowns, loose, long garments made of linen, usually white or undyed. These weren't flimsy little things. They were substantial garments, ankle-length, long-sleeved, sometimes lined with additional fabric for warmth. Underneath the nightgown, you might also wear an undertunic or even keep on your daytime undergarments, called braziers for men, which were a bit like loose linen shorts. Women wore long linen chemises that served as underwear and nightgown combined. The point was layers of linen against your skin, because linen, despite being a relatively light fabric, is wonderfully insulating and absorbs moisture. You're going to sweat a bit under all those blankets and furs, and linen pulls that moisture away from your skin, preventing the clammy feeling that would make you even colder. On your head, and this is wonderful, you might wear a nightcap. Not the droopy cartoon kind, though those did exist, but a close-fitting cap made of linen or wool, sometimes with ear flaps. Because you lose tremendous amounts of heat through your head. We know this now from science, but medieval people knew it from experience. A good nightcap could make the difference between shivering miserably and sleeping reasonably well. Some people even wore sleeping hoods, lined with fur, that covered the head, ears, and sometimes wrapped around the neck. Imagine trying to sleep looking like a medieval astronaut, but warmer. And the feet. Oh, the feet were a constant problem. Cold feet could keep you awake for hours, so people developed solutions. Thick wool socks, certainly hand-knitted, probably by someone in your household or purchased from a local knitter who specialized in such things. The wool would be lanolin-rich, meaning it still had some of the natural sheep oils in it, making it partially water-resistant and extra warm. Over these socks, wealthier people might wear soft leather bed shoes or slippers, designed not for walking but just for keeping feet warm under the blankets. But there was another trick, a medieval heating pad of sorts. Remember I mentioned warming pans earlier? Let me describe these properly. A warming pan was a long-handled metal container, usually brass or copper, with a lid. You filled it with hot coals or heated stones, closed it up, and ran it between your sheets before climbing into bed. The metal retained heat for hours, warming your linens and taking the worst chill off. Servants would do this maybe half an hour before you retired, so the bed was gloriously warm when you slipped in. For your feet specifically, there were also bed stones or bed bricks. These were literally stones or bricks, heated in the fireplace or in ovens, then wrapped in cloth and placed at the foot of the bed. They stayed warm for hours and hours. Stone is excellent at holding heat, just as it's good at holding cold. Some ingenious households even had specially shaped pottery containers, almost like early hot water bottles, which could be filled with hot water, stoppered, wrapped in cloth, and tucked into the bed. These were less common but absolutely brilliant. Now, let's talk about the room itself, because keeping warm wasn't just about the bed. Medieval builders and decorators understood, through long experience, how to make a cold stone room less hostile. First, tapestries. Those huge, heavy woven wall hangings you see in castles weren't just art, though they were often extraordinarily beautiful, depicting hunting scenes or biblical stories or mythical creatures. They were insulation. A tapestry hanging on a wall created a small air gap between the cold stone and the room's interior. Air is actually a good insulator when it's trapped and still. That gap, combined with the thickness of the woven wool or silk, made a noticeable difference. Some wealthy households would have multiple layers of tapestries in winter, literally hanging them one over another. The floors were another problem. Stone or tile floors are beautiful but brutally cold. So people covered them with rushes, dried marsh reeds or grasses, spread in thick layers. This was the cheap option, common in halls and lesser rooms. The rushes provided some insulation and could be swept out and replaced when they got too soiled. For royal chambers, though, you'd have rugs or carpets. Many of these were imported from the East, Turkey, Persia, Egypt, and they were phenomenally expensive. An average person's entire annual income might not buy even a small carpet. But they were worth it in winter. Thick wool pile, often knotted by hand in intricate patterns, creating a layer between your feet and the cold floor. Some households also layered carpets on carpets, using worn ones as underlays beneath newer, more beautiful ones. Windows were a particular challenge. Glass was still relatively rare and expensive in much of medieval Europe, especially in the early Middle Ages. Many castle windows were just open slots in the stone, designed for shooting arrows or allowing light in. These would be covered in winter with wooden shutters, and behind the shutters, people would hang heavy cloth, oiled cloth, waxed cloth, even layers of wool, to block drafts. Later, as glass became more common in the 13th and 14th centuries, it was usually small panes held together with lead in latticed patterns. This glass wasn't like modern glass. It was thicker, more uneven, full of bubbles and distortions. But it kept the wind out while letting some light in, which was a vast improvement. Even with glass, windows remained drafty, so people would sometimes hang curtains inside as well, creating yet another insulating layer. In the depths of winter, you might have wooden shutters closed outside, glass in the middle, and curtains inside, and it still wouldn't be enough to stop all the drafts. Medieval rooms were simply drafty places. People accepted this as a fact of life. Let me tell you about a food that was perfect for cold nights: frumenty. This was a dish made from whole wheat grains, boiled for a long time until they became soft and porridge-like, then mixed with milk, eggs, spices, and sometimes saffron, which turned it a lovely golden color. It was served warm, often sweetened with honey, and it was wonderfully filling. The wheat released its starches slowly, giving you steady energy through the night, and the milk and eggs provided protein and fat, all things your body could convert to warmth. Frumenty was especially popular around Christmas time, but people ate it throughout winter. It's been traced back to at least the 13th century, with recipes appearing in early cookbooks. The dish connected to something deep in medieval life: the rhythm of eating with the seasons, of consuming heavy, warming foods when the world outside was frozen, and lighter foods when summer came. There was wisdom in it, a kind of intuitive nutrition that we've partially lost. As you lie in your medieval bed, in your layers of linen and wool, with your nightcap on and your feet near a warming stone, with tapestries muffling the wind and rush lights or candles burning low, you're participating in a survival strategy developed over centuries. Nothing about it is effortless. Everything requires preparation, maintenance, resources. But it works, more or less. You're still not truly warm, not by modern standards. But you're warm enough. And there's something almost comforting in that, in knowing that you've done everything possible, that human ingenuity has been applied to the simple problem of surviving the night, and that countless generations before you have done exactly this same thing. Sleep, when it comes, is earned. And perhaps that makes it somehow sweeter. Let your mind rest on that thought as we drift forward. Settle in deeper now, friend. Adjust your pillow slightly if you need to. We're going to slow down even more and explore something fascinating about medieval heating, the way smoke and fire were understood, managed, and lived with. Because fire wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a constant presence, a companion, and occasionally a danger. In the earliest medieval castles, we're talking about the 10th and 11th centuries now, there often weren't proper chimneys. There were just central hearths, fire pits in the middle of the great hall, with smoke drifting up to the ceiling and eventually finding its way out through small openings, gaps in the roof, or a simple hole called a louvre. Living in these spaces meant living with smoke. Your eyes stung constantly. Your clothes smelled of wood smoke. The timbers in the ceiling were blackened and preserved by the constant exposure, which actually helped prevent rot and insect damage, an accidental benefit. But sleeping chambers were different. As castles evolved, particularly from the 12th century onward, fireplaces with proper chimneys became more common. These were engineering marvels, actually. Think about it. You need to build a stone channel that vents smoke upward, out through the castle walls, without catching the building on fire and without letting too much cold air rush back down. The people who designed these understood airflow in ways that seem intuitive to us now but were revolutionary then. A good fireplace had a deep firebox, allowing you to build a substantial fire. It had a throat, the narrow part where the firebox meets the chimney, which created a natural draft, pulling smoke upward. And it had a damper, sometimes, which could be adjusted to control the draft. Too much draft and your fire burns too hot and fast, consuming wood rapidly. Too little and smoke backs into the room. It was an art form, getting it right. The chimneys themselves became architectural features. In fancy castles, they might be decorated, carved with patterns, sometimes even painted. They were status symbols. Look, we have advanced enough to have proper chimneys. But they were also practical achievements. A well-built chimney could mean the difference between a room you could actually inhabit in winter and one you'd avoid except in direst necessity. Now, let's talk about the fuel. What were people burning in these fireplaces? Mostly wood, of course, but the type mattered enormously. Oak was prized. It burned hot and long, producing excellent coals that could be banked to smolder through the night. Beech was also good, and ash. These hardwoods were valuable, and forests were carefully managed to ensure supply. In fact, one of a king's important resources was forest rights, access to large wooded areas where timber could be harvested. Losing access to good firewood was a serious economic blow. Softwoods like pine and fir were less desirable because they burned fast and spat sparks, creating fire hazards. But in regions where hardwood was scarce, people burned what they had. They supplemented with peat in some areas, partially decomposed plant matter dug from bogs, dried, and burned. Peat doesn't burn as hot as wood, but it smolders beautifully, producing steady low heat for hours. In Ireland and Scotland especially, peat was the primary fuel for ordinary people, and even nobility used it when wood was scarce. There was also charcoal, which we mentioned earlier. Charcoal is wood that's been partially burned in a low-oxygen environment, driving off moisture and volatile compounds, leaving almost pure carbon. It burns hotter and cleaner than wood, with less smoke, which made it ideal for braziers in bedchambers. Professional charcoal burners lived in forests, tending their smoldering mounds, producing charcoal for sale. It was an ancient craft, crucial to medieval life, needed for blacksmithing, cooking, and heating. The smell of all this burning would have been omnipresent. Wood smoke, charcoal smoke, occasionally peat smoke. It must have seeped into everything: clothes, hair, bedding, even food. To medieval noses, this was just what life smelled like. To us, suddenly transported there, it might be overwhelming at first. But I suspect you'd adapt. The human nose adjusts, and what seems strong initially fades into the background. Here's something wonderful. People sometimes burn herbs and aromatic woods along with their regular fuel. Juniper branches, for instance, gave off a clean, sweet smell when burned. Rosemary, lavender, dried roses, all of these might be tossed onto a fire, not for heat but for fragrance. This served two purposes. It made the room smell pleasant, and medieval people believed certain scents had healthful properties, that they could purify air, prevent disease, ward off bad humors. Rosemary was thought to strengthen memory and improve sleep. Lavender was calming, soothing to the nerves. This belief wasn't entirely superstition. Modern aromatherapy has validated that certain scents do affect mood and relaxation. But medieval people didn't need scientific studies. They had centuries of observation and tradition. If burning lavender helped grandmothers sleep, then it would help you sleep too. Let me tell you about Hippocras, a drink worth knowing. Hippocras was spiced wine, named supposedly after Hippocrates, though the connection is dubious. It was made by steeping wine with cinnamon, ginger, cloves, long pepper, grains of paradise, exotic spices that cost a fortune. The mixture was sweetened with honey, strained through cloth, and served warm. It was considered medicinal, something to aid digestion and promote health. A cup of Hippocras before bed was thought to ensure restful sleep and pleasant dreams. The recipe appears in various manuscripts from the 14th century onward. One version from the French cookbook Le Viandier, written around 1375, specifies the exact proportions of spices. People took this seriously. Spices weren't just flavoring, they were pharmacy. And the warmth, the slight alcohol content, the sweetness, the complex flavors, all of it combined to create a sensation of comfort and well-being. Your body relaxed, your mind eased, and sleep came more readily. Back in your bedchamber, as the fire burns low and the smoke drifts lazily up the chimney, you're experiencing a form of comfort that's been refined over generations. The stones of the walls, cold though they are doing their job, keeping out wind, rain, snow, enemies. The fire, smoky though it might be, is keeping the worst cold at bay. Your layers of clothing and bedding are trapping your body heat. The Hippocras are warming you from within. And there's a peculiar rhythm to this, a cadence that's easy to fall into. The crackle of wood in the hearth, the occasional pop of a pocket of sap exploding, the soft rustle of bed curtains moving slightly in some unfelt draft, the distant howl of wind. These aren't disturbances, they're the lullaby of medieval night, sounds that signal safety, continuation, normalcy. At this moment, you're neither fully warm nor actively cold. You've reached an equilibrium, a balance between your body's heat production and the room's relentless cold. It's a state that requires maintenance. Tomorrow someone will need to replenish the firewood, clean the ashes, check the chimney, refresh the rushes on the floor, beat the dust from the tapestries. Winter in a castle is a constant project, never finished, always requiring attention. But tonight, this moment, you've achieved what was possible. And that's enough. The human body, remarkable thing that it is, can adapt to astonishing conditions. Your ancestors, going back thousands of years, slept in far worse circumstances. They huddled in caves, in hide tents, in simple shelters. This castle, with all its discomforts, represents luxury compared to that ancient past. So let yourself appreciate it. The ingenuity, the persistence, the sheer determination to not just survive but to do so with some degree of dignity and even comfort. Medieval people weren't primitive. They were practical, innovative, working within their constraints to create the best life they could. Let that thought warm you as we move gently onward. You're doing wonderfully, dear listener. Your breathing is steady, your body heavy and relaxed. Let's continue our medieval night, but now I want to shift our attention to something often overlooked. Who else was in the castle during these frozen months, and how did they manage? Because here's the thing. Castles weren't quiet, empty places with just a king and queen rattling around in the vast spaces. They were crowded, bustling communities, mini-cities really, with dozens or even hundreds of people living, working, sleeping within the walls. And in winter, when travel was difficult or impossible, when snow closed mountain passes and mud made roads impassable, everyone hunkered down together for months. Your servants, for instance, they had their own sleeping arrangements, though decidedly less comfortable than yours. Lower-ranking servants might sleep in the Great Hall, on benches along the walls or on straw pallets spread on the floor near the central hearth. The hall's fire would be massive, a roaring blaze that kept going day and night, because the hall was the heart of the castle, where people gathered, ate, conducted business. Sleeping near that fire was a privilege of sorts. Yes, the floor was hard, and you'd be sleeping in your day clothes with maybe an extra cloak or blanket. But you'd be relatively warm, and you'd be together, which provided both physical warmth and social comfort. Higher-ranking servants, trusted chamberlains and ladies-in-waiting, might have smaller rooms off the main corridors, sometimes shared among several people. These rooms would have smaller fireplaces or none at all, but they'd have doors that could be closed, creating some privacy and trapping some warmth. People would sleep 2 or even 3 to a bed, which seems strange to our modern sense of personal space, but made perfect sense then. More bodies meant more warmth. It was purely practical. The castle's soldiers, the garrison, they had it rougher. Their quarters were often in towers, in the least desirable parts of the castle. Cold, drafty rooms with minimal heating. Soldiers slept together in groups, on straw mattresses, under shared blankets. They were young, mostly with the high metabolism of youth, and they generated a lot of body heat. Still, guard duty on the walls in winter must have been brutal. Imagine standing in a stone tower, wind howling through arrow slits, for hours at a time. They'd have braziers up there, small fires in metal baskets, and they'd take turns standing near them. They'd stamp their feet, swing their arms, do anything to keep blood moving. And when their shift ended, they'd stumble back to their quarters and pile into communal beds, grateful for any warmth. Animals, too, were part of this winter community. Horses were stabled on the ground floor or in separate stable buildings, but in the coldest weather, valuable horses might be brought closer to human quarters. Their body heat was substantial. A horse generates warmth like a living furnace. Some castles had dogs, lots of dogs, used for hunting and guard duty. These dogs would sleep anywhere they could, near fires, in corners, often in the hall near their masters. A large dog, lying against your legs or back, is wonderfully warm. Medieval people knew this, and there was no shame in sharing your sleeping space with animals. Practical warmth trumped prissy hygiene concerns. Cats, of course, were everywhere, mostly working as pest control. Medieval castles had problems with rats and mice, which were attracted to stored grain and food. Cats were tolerated, sometimes even valued for keeping vermin in check. They'd sleep wherever they pleased, often finding the warmest spots with unerring feline instinct. Near fires, on piles of cloth, sometimes even curled up next to sleeping humans. A warm cat is a content cat, and a content cat is an excellent mouser. Now, food. Let me tell you about pottage, because pottage was probably the most common dish in medieval Europe, eaten by nearly everyone from peasants to kings, though fancier versions for wealthier folks. Pottage is essentially a thick soup or stew made by boiling grains, oats, barley, wheat, with vegetables, herbs, and sometimes meat or bones if you had them. It would simmer in a pot over the fire for hours, thickening as the grains broke down. In winter, pottage was a lifeline. It was hot, filling, nutritious, and you could make it from whatever you had. The recipe changed daily based on what was available. Root vegetables stored in the cellar, turnips, parsnips, onions, leeks. Dried peas or beans. Herbs grown in summer and dried, thyme, sage, parsley. Salted meat if you'd slaughtered livestock in autumn, as many did. The bones and meat would flavor the pottage beautifully, and the long cooking would tenderize even tough old meat. The beauty of pottage was its efficiency. One pot, one fire, feeding many people. You'd make a large batch and keep it warm on the edge of the fire, serving it throughout the day. At night, you'd have a bowl before bed, the warmth spreading through your stomach and chest, the carbohydrates and proteins fueling your body's nighttime metabolism. Pottage kept people alive through long winters. It's been documented in records going back to at least the 9th century, and probably existed long before that. There's something deeply communal about eating pottage from a shared pot. Everyone, servants, soldiers, family, dipping their bowls into the same vessel, eating the same food. It created a sense of unity, of shared survival. Yes, the Lord's pottage might have more meat, better spices, but the basic idea was the same. We're all in this together, this winter, this cold, this challenge. Back in your royal chamber, you're insulated from much of this communal life, but you're not entirely separate. You hear the castle around you, distant voices, footsteps, doors closing, the occasional bark of a dog or cry of a child. Because yes, there are children in the castle. Noble children being raised here. Servants' children helping with small tasks. Pages, young boys training for knighthood, learning to serve at table, care for armor, ride and fight. These children experience the cold differently than adults, boundless energy keeping them warm during the day, but at night they burrow into shared beds, 2 or 3 siblings together, under piles of blankets and furs, their small bodies clustered for warmth. Think about the darkness, too. We haven't talked enough about darkness. Modern humans rarely experience true darkness. There's always some light, street lamps, electronic devices, even just the ambient glow of civilization. Medieval night, especially in winter, was profoundly dark. Once candles and rushlights were extinguished, once fires burned low, the darkness was total. You literally could not see your hand in front of your face. This darkness was both frightening and somehow comforting. Frightening because humans are visual creatures, and we feel vulnerable when we can't see. But comforting because darkness enforced rest. Without artificial light, there was simply nothing to do but sleep. Your body's natural circadian rhythms governed everything. You went to bed not long after sunset, because why waste expensive candles? And you woke with the dawn, because that's when light returned and work became possible again. In this darkness, sounds become more important. The wind is louder. The fires crackle more distinct. Your own breathing and the breathing of others nearby becomes a reassurance you're not alone. And perhaps this is part of why medieval people seemed less troubled by sharing sleeping spaces. In the dark, surrounded by cold and night, the presence of others was security. As you drift now, in your curtained bed, in your layers of linen and wool and fur, imagine that deep darkness beyond your curtains. Imagine the cold pressing against the castle from outside, the snow falling steadily, piling against the walls. Imagine the hundreds of other souls in this castle, all finding their own ways to stay warm, to sleep, to make it through to morning. You're all connected in this effort, this shared survival. And there's something rather beautiful in that. A reminder that humans have always been social creatures, dependent on each other, stronger together than apart. Let that sense of connection, of community, of shared purpose settle over you like another blanket. Breathe slowly now, friend. In and out, gentle and even. We're deep in winter together, deep in our medieval reverie, and I want to talk about something both melancholy and hopeful, the way people coped with winter's length and what they dreamed about while waiting for spring. Because medieval winters weren't just cold, they were long. Depending on where you were, northern France, England, Germany, winter could mean 4 or even 5 months of serious cold. November through March, potentially with snow, ice, freezing rain. And remember, there were no weather forecasts, no certainty about when things would improve. You didn't know if the snow would melt next week or linger for another month. You couldn't plan precisely. You could only endure and hope and wait. Food stores became a constant worry. In autumn, vast amounts of preparation happened, slaughtering livestock before winter because there wasn't enough fodder to keep them all alive, preserving the meat by salting, smoking, or drying, harvesting root vegetables and storing them in cold cellars, making preserves from the last fruits, jams, jellies, dried fruits, bringing in and storing enormous quantities of grain. All of this was calculated to last until spring, but it was always a gamble. A particularly harsh winter, lasting longer than expected, could mean food running short before new crops grew. Rationing might become necessary. This was a real fear, haunting every medieval household. In the castle, you were better off than most. Your storerooms were vast, filled with provisions. But even you couldn't be entirely confident. Supply lines might be cut by weather. Expected deliveries might not arrive. And you had many mouths to feed, all those servants, soldiers, visitors trapped here by winter. So even as king, you watched the stores, and you listened to your steward's reports about how much grain remains, how many barrels of salted meat, how much wine, beer, flour. This created a particular mindset, a kind of patient conservatism, a carefulness. Don't waste anything. Use every scrap. Bones from tonight's meat go into tomorrow's pottage. Stale bread becomes trenchers, edible plates, which are then eaten by servants or fed to dogs. Nothing is thrown away. This wasn't just frugality, it was survival. And yet, medieval people found joy even in this constrained winter world. They celebrated holidays, Christmas, of course, Twelfth Night, Candlemas. These breaks in the monotony were tremendously important, providing reasons to feast a little, to use some of those precious stores on special foods, to gather and tell stories, sing songs, perform plays. The Christmas feast might include a roasted boar, mince pies, which were actual meat pies back then, filled with minced meat, dried fruits, and spices, and wassail, a hot spice cider or ale passed from person to person in a communal bowl. These celebrations weren't just fun, they were psychological necessities. They gave you something to look forward to, breaking the winter into manageable chunks. From autumn to Christmas. From Christmas to Candlemas. From Candlemas to Lent. Each festival was a milestone, a marker, a promise that time was passing and spring would come. Let me tell you about a winter treat that's rather charming. Comfits. Comfits were seeds or nuts, caraway, coriander, fennel, almonds, coated in layer after layer of sugar syrup until they formed smooth, hard candies. Making comfits was labor-intensive. You'd start with your seed or nut, dip it in sugar syrup, let it dry, dip again, dry again, repeating dozens of times until the coating was thick and even. The resulting candies were expensive, special, something you'd bring out for guests or enjoy as a rare treat. Comfits had medicinal connotations. They were thought to aid digestion, sweeten the breath, and provide quick energy. And the sugar, remember, was precious. It was imported from far away, from Cyprus, Sicily, later from the Caribbean after European expansion. In medieval times, sugar was a luxury good, almost a spice, used sparingly. A bowl of comfits at a feast was a display of wealth and generosity. People would suck on comfits slowly, letting the sugar dissolve, savoring the hint of spice or nut inside. It's a small pleasure, but in the middle of a long, cold winter, small pleasures mattered enormously. The sweetness on your tongue, the slight buzz of sugar hitting your bloodstream, the knowledge that spring would eventually bring more sweetness, fresh fruits, honey from the first flowers the bees visited. At night, in your chamber, perhaps you'd have a small dish of comfits by your bedside. Before you slept, you'd take one, let it melt slowly in your mouth, a tiny luxury to end the day. And as you drift off, the taste of sugar and spice lingering, you might dream of spring. Because people did dream of spring. They thought about it, talked about it, longed for it. They imagined the day when the snow would melt, when green shoots would push up through the earth, when you could ride out of the castle without ice and mud. When fresh food would be available again, greens, tender young vegetables, new milk from animals that had wintered over and now were calving or lambing. When the sun would gain strength, the days lengthen, the world would warm. This anticipation shaped the medieval year. Life was cyclical in a way that's hard for modern people to grasp. We can eat strawberries in December, turn up the heat with a thermostat, fly to warm climates if we choose. Medieval people were bound to the seasons utterly. Winter meant cold, darkness, endurance. Spring meant rebirth, relief, possibility. Summer meant growth, abundance. Autumn meant preparation, harvest, the coming of winter again. Around and around, year after year, the same pattern. And there was comfort in that pattern, even as it imposed hardships. You knew what to expect. You knew that winter, no matter how hard, would end. You knew that your ancestors had survived countless winters, and so would you. There was a deep cultural memory at work, a collective knowledge encoded in traditions, recipes, building techniques, all the small practical skills that made winter survival possible. As you lie in your medieval bed, on a night perhaps in January or February, the coldest, darkest part of winter, you hold on to these thoughts. Spring will come. It always does. The birds will return from their migrations. Flowers will bloom. The world will come alive again. But for now, there's just the night, the cold, the waiting. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's a lesson in that patience, in the acceptance of discomfort, in the knowledge that not everything can be fixed immediately, that some things must simply be endured. Modern life has made us impatient, accustomed to instant solutions. But our medieval ancestors knew that some solutions take time, that some discomforts are temporary, that survival sometimes means just holding on. So hold on, dear listener. Rest in this moment. You're warm enough, safe enough, alive. And tomorrow, both the literal tomorrow and the metaphorical spring that always comes, will bring its own gifts. Let that hope nestle beside you now as we drift into our final chapter. You're nearly asleep now, I can tell. Your breathing has that slow, deep rhythm. Your body is heavy and still. But stay with me just a little longer, just through this last gentle chapter, as we imagine waking in that medieval castle as winter morning breaks. The first thing you'd notice is the cold. During the night, the fire has burned down to ash and a few glowing embers. The braziers, if there were any, have gone completely cold. The temperature in your chamber has dropped significantly. You can see your breath when you exhale, little clouds forming in the dim light. But you're still cocooned in your bed, in your nest of blankets and furs and body heat, and for a moment, you don't move. You lie there, savoring the warmth, delaying the inevitable moment when you'll have to emerge into the cold room. Outside, you hear the castle coming to life. Distant voices, footsteps on stone, someone coughing, the sound of wood being chopped for the day's fires. The castle is a living organism, and it's waking up. Eventually, you stir. Your chamberlain has likely already entered, quietly, trained to be unobtrusive, and is rebuilding your fire, adding kindling to those embers, coaxing them back into flame. The dry wood catches, flames leap up, and slowly, very slowly, the room begins to warm again. It will take time, perhaps an hour before the room is reasonably comfortable, but the process has begun. You emerge from your bed curtains and immediately the cold hits you. Even in your night clothes, you shiver. Quickly, your attendants bring you a dressing gown, heavy wool or even fur-lined, and you wrap it around yourself. Thick slippers go on your feet. You move closer to the fire, holding out your hands to the flames, feeling sensation return to your fingers. There's a washing station prepared, a basin of water that's been heated in the kitchens and carried up here. It's warm, wonderfully warm, and you splash your face, wash your hands, the hot water feeling luxurious on your cold skin. In winter, full baths are rare. Too much effort to heat that much water, and too cold to sit wet in an unheated room afterward. So you wash in stages, parts of your body at a time, staying mostly clothed. Your day clothes are brought, layers again, always layers. A linen under tunic, a wool tunic over that, perhaps a surcoat lined with fur. Thick wool stockings, leather boots lined inside with cloth or fur. A cloak, heavy and substantial, for moving through the castle's cold corridors. You're dressing for indoor cold, which is a specific kind of challenge. You need to be warm, but not so bulky you can't move or work. As you dress, servants are busy around the chamber, sweeping out the old rushes from the floor, scattering fresh ones mixed with herbs, their green scent rising as they're crushed underfoot. Tidying the bed, shaking out the linens, smoothing the furs. Emptying the chamber pot. Yes, you had one, because no one wanted to walk through freezing corridors to the garderobe, medieval toilet, in the middle of the night. All these small domestic tasks happening around you, preparing the room for another day. Then breakfast. In your private chamber or down in the hall, depending on your mood. Medieval breakfast was often simple: bread, cheese, perhaps cold meat left from yesterday. Ale or watered wine to drink, because water by itself wasn't always safe. The bread might be toasted over the fire or dipped in warm ale to soften it. Cheese was a staple, stored in wheels or blocks, providing protein and fat to start the day. And the meal would be quick. People didn't linger over breakfast the way we might. There was work to do, even for a king. Let me tell you about one more food, a breakfast specialty: porridge. Now, we've talked about pottage, but porridge was different. Simpler, sweeter. It was usually made from oats, boiled in milk or water until thick and creamy, then sweetened with honey. Sometimes spiced with cinnamon if you had it. The oats would have been grown on your lands, harvested in late summer, dried and stored. Honey came from your own hives or from tenants who paid part of their rent in honey and beeswax. Porridge was warming, nourishing, easy on the stomach. Medieval physicians recommended it for invalids and children, believing it was gentle and healthful. And they weren't wrong. Oats are excellent nutrition, full of soluble fiber that releases energy slowly, keeping you satisfied for hours. A bowl of hot porridge on a winter morning, sweetened with honey, perhaps with a dash of precious cinnamon stirred in, was a simple comfort that connected you to the land, the seasons, the cycles of planting and harvest. As you eat your porridge or bread, as you warm yourself by the fire, you might reflect on the night that's passed. You survived it. You're here, alive, ready for another day. And tonight, you'll do it all again. The preparations, the layers, the fire, the bed, the slow drift into sleep. It's a routine, yes, but it's a routine born of necessity and refined by generations of experience. And here's the thing. Medieval people didn't view this as hardship, not in the way we might. To them, it was just life. They didn't know about central heating or electric blankets, so they didn't miss them. They developed systems that worked well enough. They were competent, capable, adapted to their circumstances. When we look back and think, how did they stand it? We're imposing our standards on their reality. They weren't standing it. They were living it fully and finding meaning and even happiness within it. There's a lesson there, maybe, about adaptation, resilience, the human capacity to make the best of circumstances. About not waiting for perfect conditions before we allow ourselves to be content. About finding warmth, literal and metaphorical, wherever we can. As morning strengthens outside your castle windows, as the weak winter sun rises over frozen fields, you're ready for the day. The night is behind you. You're warm now, fed, dressed, prepared. And when night comes again, you'll be ready for that too. And so, dear friend, we've wandered through a long winter night in a medieval castle, experiencing the cold, the darkness, the layers, the small comforts that made sleep possible. We felt the weight of furs, tasted spiced wine and porridge, heard the crackle of fires and the howl of wind. We've understood just a little what it meant to survive winter without modern conveniences, and we've seen the ingenuity and persistence that made that survival not just possible but almost comfortable. I hope you've drifted peacefully through this journey. I hope your own blankets feel a little warmer now, your own room a little cozier by comparison. And I hope you've found that gentle, quiet place where history becomes a lullaby, where the past helps us settle into the present moment, into rest. If this calm journey helped you unwind, if you peacefully drifted off somewhere along the way, perhaps in Chapter 3 or during our talk about pottage, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me where you finally let go, where sleep found you. And if you'd like more of these slow, gentle historical journeys, consider subscribing. We'll wander through more forgotten corners of history together, always at this same unhurried pace. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Now rest, truly rest, and let the centuries fade away. You're exactly where you need to be. Sweet dreams, dear friend. Sweet dreams.